Go through it on some paper. I'm gonna just yeah. So,
but that's the rule.
it's not a rule. It's math. It can't be in the first and the seventh, right?
Right.
That's the rule.
Okay.
And by mathematical calculation, it ends up not being able to fall in the second or the 12th or the 6th or the 8th as well. Just by mathematical calculation. If it can't be in the first or the 7th, then it doesn't end up in those houses.
Okay, so then if I have it in the 6th, then it's incorrect.
No, this is the Aruda Lugna, the 6th from it.
Oh.
So it can't be in the, if it was in the 7th, it can't be in the 7th or the 9th.
Right.
So, you're with me now, okay, yeah. So any Aruda pada in general is what I'm saying. So Aruda padas, on one level they break down and we can't use half the chart, but then we start using everything in axis, so we're kind of doubling the chart at a different level. Now one important thing that I've been doing a lot of work on today, just to shine some light on what the importance of what Guruji was teaching besides just the moon, if you notice where the Aruda can't be are the same as the yogas, the Chandra yogas that we learned this morning. And there's a very important key hidden in that. So, okay. So the second store is money, the eighth store is prana, and the nadis talk, and all this A8 stuff, it's all found in the nadis. It's not found in Parashara, it's not found in Jaimini, it's not found in Saravelli, it's not found in your average books. Mrityu-pada stuff is primarily coming from the nadis. Most of the Aruda-padas, besides the Aruda Lagna and the Upapada Lagna, are coming from the nadis. They're not found in the general texts. And most of those examples are, most of the teachings in the nadis are given as examples. They're not giving as direct teachings like Parashara is giving. So we infer a lot from that. But one of the key things the nadis talk about is they talk about observing the first and eighth house for the longevity of something. And my examples here to go into that is if we look at the seventh house of the Navamsha for the partner, it's the eighth house from that that shows when that's going to break. If we look at the 10th house of the Dashamsha, it's the fifth house from that that's going to show when we're going to change a job. So the first and the eighth house are very important on the longevity of something, how long it's going to stay in our life from anything. Okay. Now, we're going to start going into some death calculations in a minute. And so that's why I'm beginning to focus on this. Now, before we start calculating death with the Mrityu-pada, we have to know that there's going to be death. And there's two ways that we know there's going to be in death. One, the person's in bed, and they're sick, and they can't move. And then anybody can predict about when they're going to die, because the chances are a lot less. But then there's calculating death from without that kind of sign. And when I'm saying death now, I'm speaking of death of a person, but it's going to be death of a job. It's going to be death of a home. It'll be death of a parent. It'll be every bhava in the chart can have a death. So, and these calculations can be used for the death of anything. So don't be afraid that it's just death of people. I see some straight faces. So three major points that need to be hit in order for the destruction or transformation of a bhava. Before we start looking at the A8, again, just like when the prior technique, before we start looking at how bad the person suffers, like we saw his Saturn, it was bad. We looked at his A8, we see that he's protected. So before we start calculating death or the trend or knowing that something is going to shift, we want to see the nadis go vary into 3 points: the Sun, Moon, and Jupiter, the tripods of life, which is the Lagna, the Paka Lagna, and the Aruda. And so that applies to every house, not just the Lagna. Because the fourth house, we can say the house, which is the fourth house, the fourth Lord, and the A4, the Aruda of that house. So if the house is going to die, if there's going to be a problem, if the house is going to burn down, if there's going to be, the person's going to lose their house in a foreclosure, something of this nature, we have to see that because of dasha and transits, that there's going to be a problem with the house. There should be a problem with the lord of the house, and there should be a problem with the aruda of that house before we start calculating that that house is going to be destroyed or transformed. Make sense? I'm giving background here right now. So just so my purpose is to use the A8. But if I just teach you how to use the A8 and you don't know that there's steps to do prior, then you're gonna go wrong.
So the point there was that if you want to look at the mother, you look at the fourth house lord, and the eighth lord.
Sun, Moon, Jupiter. Yeah.
Afflicted.
There has to be something going on with each of them, generally. Now, maybe just two of them have an affliction. And so the chance of something happening, if you make your prediction, is going to be less. If there's something happening with all three, then you can be pretty confident in going into a deeper level. And that's just for general transformation of a thing. And death is a transformation. We also look, the nadis also talk, where are we here? Okay. The nadis also talk about using, for calculating death, looking at the transit of Saturn over the 8th lord and the amsha of the 8th lord. So we look at where the 8th lord is placed in the Navamsha, and the transit of Saturn through that sign is very important. It's down later in the paper, but something that I also just researching, because before I teach this technique on 2 charts, I did it on 20 charts to make sure it worked before I get up here and start teaching something that I don't know if it really works. So in my research on this, I noticed that every time somebody died, that Saturn was either transiting the Aruda Lagna, opposite the Aruda Lagna, or at least in trines. Most of the time transiting or opposite, and occasionally in trines. So when Saturn is in the trines, and it's a standard rule with Arudas, that it's the Aruda, it's opposite, or the Aruda, it's trines, or it's opposite. I'm sure most of you have heard that, yes?